as I write in The Making of Biblical Womanhood, Reformation theology should have set women free, but it didn't. As we just saw in the medieval chapter, as well as in our conversation about medieval women were limited by patriarchy in many ways similar to women after the Reformation. But because patriarchy shape-shifted, because medieval women were limited because of their bodies, which meant if they could escape their bodies, they could preach, teach, and lead like men. After the Reformation, this loophole goes away for women. What I thought we might do is look at how women, or listen to what women would have heard in sermons preached to them. Because this can help us really see the difference in what happened to women across the Reformation era. So I wanted to read a little bit of one of my favorite sermons from a collection of medieval sermons written by a man named John Merck. So let me just read you a little bit of this sermon. And just to let you know that this sermon is what we call a sanctoral sermon. It is a sermon about the life of a saint. And the life of this saint, this woman named Winifred, was also what we call a local saint. She wasn't ever officially, she didn't officially become a saint throughout all of Europe. She was mostly only recognized within the area around Shropshire and Wales. So let's listen to what the medieval audience would have heard about women from this sermon. So this is how it begins. It says, "Christian men and women, such a day shall be Saint Winifred's day, the day which is now ordained to be hallowed. And therefore many men who have devotion to this holy maiden will come to church this day to worship God and this holy maiden and martyr. We will hear how she suffered martyrdom. Although some of you probably know the story, many do not. And it is a good tale, twice told. But it is better to learn and to understand. There was, a long time ago, a holy hermit who came. He was a good man, and he came to Winifred's father, who was a rich man of land and rents, and he asked him to give him a place of earth on which he might build a church to serve God and to preach God's word to the people. Then was Winifred's father glad of his asking and ordained him a place near his own house where, so that he and his daughter might come regularly to the service of God. And then, while the church was being built, this holy man preached God's word to the people, and Winifred would come and listen with her father. And when she heard him speak of the great reward that maidens would have in heaven that would surpass all others, she had such great devotion in his saying that she made a vow that she would never have part of a man's body, but she would always live in her maidenhood while she could. Then on a Sunday, when the church had been built and the holy man was there preaching, Winifred was at home because she was sick and could not go to church. And as she sat at home by herself, the king's son, whose name was Craddock, came to this maiden. But when he spoke to her of doing that sin, of lying with her, she said that she would go into her chamber and make her more honest than she was, which means better looking, and then come to him again. And so she went into her chamber, and then she jumped out the window and ran as fast as she could towards the church for help. But Craddock saw her running towards the church, and he overtook her, and he caught her, and he said, "If you will not assent to my will, I will cut off your head." Then kneeling, Winifred said, "I would rather you kill me than defile my body, because I made a vow to God." So Craddock took out his sword and cut off her head. And they were on a hill with the church at the bottom, and her head rolled down the hill to the church, and it never stopped tumbling till it had come in sight of all the people. And they were sore afraid, and they made a great noise. And the holy man had wonder what they were saying, and he came to them to see what the cause of it was. And then he saw her head, and he took it up, and he kissed it, weeping, and he held it to his body, and went out and beheld Craddock, who was wiping his sword on the grass, and there was a great bloody streak. And said the holy man to him, "You wicked man, ask mercy of God for this horrible deed. And if God will have mercy on you, and if you will not, I pray God send his vengeance on you right now," in sight of all the people. Craddock would not. And so he fell down on the earth and died. And as soon as he did, the earth opened up and swallowed him, body and soul, into hell. Then took the holy man the head of Winifred, and he put it against her body, and he held it there with her mantle. And then he said mass. And when he had sung and preached to the people of this maiden, he said God would not that she should be dead, for he had ordained many people to be helped by her. So he bade every man and woman to pray to God to raise her again to life. And God did. And when she sat up with her head, she wiped her face of the dust that was on it, and she spoke to them as sound as she had been before. Then God, through this maiden, God worked many miracles, and she lived for 15 more years. And virgins came to follow her. And because of the important work that Winifred was doing in the area, the holy man left because he was no longer needed. So there you go, an authentic medieval sermon. So what did you hear about medieval women in that sermon? First of all, we clearly heard that the highest calling for this woman was not to get married, but it was actually to be single, to dedicate her life to God, which increased her holiness. And as the holy man said, that she was ordained by God to help all the people in that area. We heard Winifred decided to reject marriage, and it was accepted by her family, by the people in the parish. And when a man tried to violate that, he was punished. Okay, let's compare that with some early modern sermons. We're not going to read a whole sermon here, but actually what I have done is 𝙬𝙬𝙬𝙚 Festial was one of the most popular sermon collections in late medieval England. And after the Reformation, a man named Thomas Cranmer, who you all may know, decided to commission a series of sermons that he hoped would counter the popularity of sermons like Festial. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why I chose it, because it was created in direct response to medieval sermons like Festial. So Cranmer's account in 1547, he said that he wanted his homily collection to, quote, replace such popular medieval collections of foolish lying tales like 𝙬𝙬𝙬𝙬𝙬 Festial. He wanted it also to be composed in English so that it could be preached to the people in England, just like 𝙬𝙬𝙬𝙬 Festial had been. The first set of homilies were published in 1547. These are called the Edwardian homilies. And later, the homilies were incorporated into Article 34 of the 42 articles during the English Reformation. The second set of homilies, called the Elizabethan homilies, appeared in 1563 with 20 sermons. And then a final addition was made to the homilies in 1570 with the addition of a sermon called Against Disobedience and Willful Rebellion, which makes a lot of historical sense. The 1563 Tudor homilies, however, contain a sermon on the state of matrimony. And it quotes Paul in regards to the role of wives. This is going to sound familiar to you. Listen to what it says. It says, quote, "Let women be subject to their husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the woman, as Christ is the head of the church. Here you understand that God hath commanded that we should acknowledge the authorities of the husband and refer to him the honor of obedience." The homily continues, quoting from Corinthians, that wives should cover their heads as a sign of their submissive role. Like women in the ancient world, the sermon reminds that wives in the 16th century England should defer to their husbands as Lord and show them reverence through obedience. Y'all, this is a significant difference from what we saw with medieval sermons. In fact, although I didn't walk through it all with you, I talk about it in The Making of Biblical Womanhood. Paul is quoted in regards to women very rarely in medieval sermons. In fact, the type of language that we just heard in the Tudor homily is very different from anything that we can find in late medieval English sermons. What we have seen is this shift. Patriarchy still exists in both places. But in the medieval world, women could still preach, teach, and lead. Not very many of them. It was much harder for them. But as we move into the early modern world, even so early on in the Reformation era, the Tudor homilies are very, very early on in the Reformation era. Already we see the prescriptions, the Pauline prescriptions being invoked against women in very similar ways to the way they are invoked today. Just think about this difference. Think about the implications that it has for women. The Reformation, as I write in The Making of Biblical Womanhood, may have removed the priest, but it replaced him with the husband. And women's access to leadership diminished significantly.